Okay, so welcome to the weekly Ransomed Heart podcast. This is your host today, the ever-affirming, warm, fatherly Craig McConnell.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm in our studio with Morgan Snyder and Alex Burton. And Morgan, I mean, it felt like a good thing just to talk about was you've been giving some thought to men in their 30s, and God's been giving you some insight and thoughts to share, and we'd love to just hear some of what you're thinking about. Again, this is unscripted, unrehearsed, and just love to hear. Where's God taking you with this idea of men in their 30s? That's a
fish?
Dog in the background. Oh, there goes the cow. We're recording this out in a field. Go ahead, Morgan.
Oh, man. Thanks, Craig. I turned 30 several years ago, and that was really hard. And I was really surprised at how hard it was. Because I paused, I looked at my life and went, well, from one perspective, from the main perspective, my life's really good. It's rich. Beautiful marriage and beautiful, healthy kids and meaningful work. And, I mean, what more can a man ask for? And yet, when I was honest, really looking under the hood, I realized on the deepest level I was frustrated, had some anger or some level of resignation and really just a ambivalence, this big question mark. I felt like, what is my life to be about? And even more so, what is a man's life to be about in this season of young manhood where all of a sudden you find yourself in the throes of life where you're pursuing a career and you have a wife and children and life feels like whitewater and you just come up for a breath and you wonder, am I doing it right? Is this the path towards life? Is this the abundant life Jesus talks about? And so I set out on a quest of sorts where I was asking God, help me interpret my life. Help me see clearly because I want to know, I want my life to matter. And I'm praying and asking God to speak and not hearing anything, asking more. And eventually, my sense was God saying, ask the counsel of older men. Find men in whom you respect that have many more years than you and ask them what they think. Ask them, what is their counsel for a young man? What should your life be about? And so I set off on this amazing journey. Over about 6 months, every other week or so, I would spend connecting with an older man. I found the oldest men I could find, and I'd have lunches and letters and phone conversations and listening to their counsel. And it was a remarkable experience. I think, should I go on or should we kind of be...
what was the feedback that you got from those guys? I mean, that's a broad spectrum of men. Summarize it. What struck you?
It really was a broad spectrum, and some of them knew me well, and others didn't know me at all, and different walks of life. And Craig, what was so cool is there were these themes. There were these constant themes that spoke through most of the men's lives, and then obviously there were particular things in each man's strength, gifting story, but I think it's really summed up in a quote by Dallas Willard that the primary work of God is finding men in whom he can entrust his power. Finding men in whom he can trust his power. And the story of most men is being entrusted with power and it bringing harm to themselves and those under their influence. Because they don't have the masculinity, the capacity, the character to handle it. Right. And so they actually get crushed under the weight of their kingdom. And most men, and if you look at Scripture, it's just amazing because a few years ago I started looking at this in Genesis, and it's just phenomenal when you read through this creation story where God begins to create light and dark and land and plants and animals and then man. And the very next sentence, the very next breath out of God after creating him is he says, fill the earth, subdue it, rule. Rule over the fish, rule over the air, rule over the living creatures. In the Hebrew, that's interpreted as fierce mastery. As I've meditated on that verse for years, I've come to see it as God saying, bring my nature, bring my personality, bring my character to the world. And that's what a man's called to do. And so it's actually God that's more invested in us becoming men that are powerful than we are. And yet, most men set off to build a kingdom.
Right.
And ultimately, they don't become the man internally that can handle it, and it brings harm to them and those under their influence.
So, in your thinking, Morgan, then as a man is going through his 30s, that is a decade where God is doing what with a man?
Right. It's a great question. What would it look like for a man?
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome,
Yeah,
Craig. And
yeah.
even that look, I wish we had a camera.
Yeah.
You're beautiful.
Thank you.
Craig was the oldest man I could find when I asked for counsel. So he wheels up his wheelchair, I give him a bib, and he starts telling me stories. Craig, I realized that most young men set out to build a kingdom. It takes the expression like, make a little money, make a name for yourself, get something going. Out of good intentions, mostly, especially believing men, Christian men, they try to build a kingdom. And yet God, I believe, is saying, make it about character over kingdom. In other words, we set out to choose for God to restore our character. And that it becomes a decade of dismantling rather than building. It's a decade of excavation. It's a decade of facing the reality of the brokenness within us, the places that are young and uninitiated, places that are wounded, places that are bound by warfare, spiritual warfare, and the demonic in our life, places of just areas in our character where we've compromised over time. That the invitation, I believe, from the Father is to let our motive be about that restoration and building our character rather than building a kingdom.
Yeah, you know, what strikes me as you're saying this, Morgan, is, my gosh, most men are hoping to pretty much peak in their 30s.
Right.
I mean,
right.
you're talking about preparation for something that's, off in their 40s or their 50s?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's counter to an awful lot of men's intuition about their own life.
Yeah, that's what strikes me too, Morgan, is, as you talk about that, it's so countercultural
Right.
to what really reality is. I mean, I remember when I hit my 30s, I think all that I could think is, well, dang, I don't have any excuses anymore. I'm 30 now.
Right.
I'm just in my 20s. I'm a little irresponsible, but wait till I get to my 30s.
Yes.
And then you get to your 30s and you're like, nothing's really changed. I'm still the same guy.
Yes.
Maybe I've learned a few things more, but I don't feel like now I've arrived at a place where, give me the keys to the kingdom because I'm ready. Man, I feel completely unready.
Right.
I mean, I'm 33 right now. I still feel that way. And,
Right.
And I think what you've identified, that idea of, no, it's really about your character development in your 30s. When we first started talking about that and I first started hearing you talk about it was actually a really hopeful thing for me.
What is it, Alex? Where's the hope come from in that?
It takes the pressure off. I mean, I think where I was before, career-wise, before coming to Ransom Heart, in my 20s was quickly advancing in responsibilities and in position in the large organization I was in. And, having older men putting confidence and responsibility on me that, quite frankly, I could accomplish.
Yes.
But that I truly wasn't ready for maturity-wise.
Right.
But felt like I had to be. And I think the world really puts pressure on us to be there. And so now to be here and to have that outlook that, no, it's really about the transformation of my character these years, I feel a whole lot more freedom to kind of step back and go, no, I don't have to have it all together right now.
Right.
Yes, I've been given some responsibilities, and I have a role to play, but there's freedom to learn, to make mistakes,
yes,
to know that no, my character's not finished.
Yes,
and I can, bump up against the negatives and the learning now, and not, have to get it right at this moment.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I mean, how are guys in the 30s, as you're sharing this, receiving it? Does it feel like cold water, or like for Alex, does it actually feel hopeful? And
right. Well, Craig, I mean, what's interesting about that is, and what's brilliant about what Alex is saying is, I'm running into so many men that are in their mid to late 30s that have set out to build kingdoms, and they've done it. They've built a business, they've built a church, they've built a practice, and they feel, as you described it, Alex, they still feel just as young inside, and it hasn't satisfied them. So the world may be looking at them going, wow, way to go. But inside they almost feel more fear, more pressure, and it feels like, whoa, I'm spinning a lot of plates, and this is kind of a house of cards.
Right.
And so I think men are resonating with it, but it's a really big risk to not pursue a kingdom, because most men seem to have this fundamental belief that if I don't build a kingdom, one, who will, and two, I'm a failure.
Right.
What is the sentence on me as a man if I'm not building something?
That kingdom validates me. That kingdom usually involves an income level or success.
Absolutely.
So respect. I mean, everything's tied in.
And yet, leaning into the counsel of these older men, it's amazing the consistency of men that the money comes and goes, that kingdoms come and go. Those things are actually very unpredictable, but the character is what continues to mature and develop and cultivate. And so I began to shift where I started seeing the scriptures as actually God is more vested in us becoming powerful. We actually, as men, become magnets for power. And so that's the easy part, really, is for God to bestow a kingdom upon us. The hard part is to choose the path of humility, and training to become a man that can handle it.
I think as you were talking about just that fear that comes on a man as he finds himself in that place of responsibility and having a kingdom before his character and his maturity is there to handle it.
Yes.
In my previous job, at one point, I ended up getting put into an interim vice president role.
Yes.
And that was actually a breaking point for me. I remember just feeling that fear of, no, I'm not, I'm not capable right now of being responsible for this. I don't have the years of experience and the wisdom to lead in this way, and yet, because I was such a diligent worker, responsible person, I got elevated to that. And what ended up happening, I ended up going to counseling. I had to get on medication for anxiety.
Right.
I mean, I was a mess. I was a wreck.
Yes.
And I think that's so common of guys in their 30s that get into that trap.
Yeah. Alex, that's so good. So Morgan, I mean, there's more to say about this in future podcasts. I mean, so what are the words you want to say today to men in their 30s, and maybe beyond that to anyone listening?
Yes, Craig, I do think it, Alex, as you're sharing, there's just so many thoughts coming to mind of where we could go. And I think it'd be good to unpack this over time of what was the counsel that those men have shared with me, and how can we share that with other young men. I think that, and so I bet there's a lot of guys out there in different places, and some of which have set out to build a kingdom, and they're going, oh my goodness, I totally resonate with that. What do I do? Where do I go? I think what I want to do there is pause and say that at the core of a healthy and vibrant worldview for a man is to believe that there is a Father in heaven, that we are sons of a Father who provides generously, who has intentioned our life, who's purposeful and generous and will come through for us. And so I'd say that all of this happens under the grace of a Father who's personally working in our life. And so I would just encourage young men and men who feel young in various places in their life to pause after this podcast and just begin with, and maybe you can pray now, that they would come to God as Father and say, Father, there's something in me that's resonating. I want to begin by yielding my masculinity to you and inviting you to father me through this process.
Okay. Wow. It's good. Good to be together. Good to talk. And there's more for us to say down the road. We'll get Morgan in here and hear more about this. If you're interested in more of the resources that Ransom Heart has, come to our website at ransomheart.com, and you'll find some things I think that will encourage you in your journey. Just another note here is on May 4th, we'll be doing a live webcast that will be at what time, Morgan? Mountain time?
6 p.m. Mountain time.
Okay.
They'll be featuring John and Stacy, and they'll be just offering some real personal coaching to men and women that are leading groups on love and war. And so if you are leading a group on love and war through the video series, the Participant's Guide, really encourage you to jump on that webcast. If you're not, check out loveandwar.net, and it's a great resource to walk with couples to try to invite God into marriages in a deeper, more authentic way. And if you have questions that you want to put out in front of John Stacy, you can send those through Facebook, or Ransom Heart's Facebook. You can send them through Twitter, and you can find all that information, more on that, at loveandwar.net.
Thanks for joining us.